Welcome to the News9 Plus Show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Israeli tanks are inside Gaza and are now believed to be heading towards Gaza city. Joining me to talk about these developments is Colonel Anurag Awasthi, an Armored Corps officer and a prominent member of India's semiconductor industry. Colonel Awasthi, welcome to the News9 Plus Show.
Thank you, Sandeep.
You're literally one of the very few people in India who could talk on armored warfare and on the semiconductor industry. And that's two conflict zones for you. It's
Absolutely.
Russia and what we're looking at in Taiwan. And China. But tell us what you're seeing right now from the visuals that are coming out of Gaza right now with Israeli tanks in. Is the day of the tank over? Are main battle tanks passé?
A large amount of people and during the course of history has tried to write obituaries of main battle tanks. But see, what we are looking here, Sandeep, is not a classical conflict. It's a very peculiar and it's a very unique conflict. Now let's go to the entire combat zone, so to say. You're looking at an area of 40 kilometers in length by 7 to 8 kilometers in width. That's the kind of area you're looking at. Densely populated with 2 million people. Just look at the amount of population there, just look at the construction, look at the roads, the entire network and everything, so on and so forth. Now the problem is this conflict is also not between two conventional powers. It's a ultra hybrid conflict where essentially you're looking at an extreme asymmetric warfare. Now coming to this asymmetry is the problem of going into the urban areas and fighting in urban terrain, or as they call it, fighting in built up areas. Now look at the challenges of the tunnels which are underground. Look at the challenges of identification of friend and foe. Look at the issues of going close down in tanks, whether it is a Merkava or it's a Namir or it is a M113.
It's three-dimensional warfare.
It's three-dimensional at all times.
Right.
So just look at the situational awareness, the positional awareness, the issues of debris, which nobody seems to be looking at it. And when even a lot of people would say that I would send the earth-moving equipment or armored dozers,
armored bulldozers
as they call it. But the whole idea is, whatever assets you send in the conflict zone have to be covered by observation and fire.
So you have three dimensions, which is air, surface of course, and in Gaza the subterranean
the tunnels.
Yes.
So that makes it very complicated.
Right.
However, when you look at the entire methodology of the Israelis, you have to go back into history when the Merkava was created. It was Merkava, by the way, as per the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, is called the chariot of God. That's what it means. So the design was created by Major General Israel Tal, as you are aware. And it has an engine in front. Unlike the other tanks.
Crew. That's right.
To protect it further.
And the interesting part of this tank is that over the last 40 years, it's only seen unconventional warfare. It's never been deployed in actual conventional war.
You're spot on. So what happens with that is that since it has always been deployed like that, the methodology of operation of this is also like that. So when you look at an armored fighting vehicle and you have that famous troika of firepower, mobility and protection. Protection in this case obviously assumes a large amount of significance. And then of course you have the active protection system like the trophy. Oh yes, a couple of tanks as we see also have those cope cages.
We don't have it on these tanks, but there are some of those with that little umbrella over the thing. How effective are cope cages, you think?
The jury is out on that, but a large amount of people do say that they are pretty ineffective against, whether it is a cornet or whether it is a javelin. Obviously the javelin is not here in this conflict. But for smaller drones, they could be effective, but my sense tells me that anything which is retrofitted onto a tank may not be very effective against very well made and very well structured conflict weapons.
So how would it fare against, say, a drone carrying an RPG-7 warhead? That's one of the biggest innovations to come out of the Russia-Ukraine war. Would a cope cage, for instance, on a Merkava protect it from one of those air-dropped RPG warheads?
I won't be very positive about it, but having said that, yes, it would give you some incidental protection for sure, as my sense tells me. But overall, I don't think it will be very, very helpful. Actually, the concept of coke cages is a very old concept.
Right.
If you recall, in the early part of 2022, when the Russians moved into Ukraine, that's the first time you saw the coke cages coming onto the T-72B1s.
Right. Right.
So I don't know, the jury's out on that. Let's see how it functions.
But I remember visiting you in your formation regiment many years back, and you took me through the tanks, the Indian Army's tanks with the armor protection and reactive armor. Tell me what would be going on in the minds of the armored regiment officers there inside Gaza. I mean, apart from the three-dimensional war, fear of being hit from all directions. What are the other challenges? One you mentioned was the debris in the streets. What other challenges could they be?
The other challenges could be the identification of friend and foe.
Right.
That's very difficult. The third challenge could be sniping. Then no matter how capable or advanced you are in terms of advanced electro-optronics inside the turret or in the fighting compartment, at the end of the day, there is a problem of positional as well as situational awareness. Right. Then, of course, you have the issues of landmines, and then you have the issues of tunnels, and then, of course, you have the issues of incidental protection of tanks, and then you have the blind corners. It's a maze, actually. So that is why, if you look at even the historical lessons of the Second World War, and if you recall, these tanks moving along into the the built-up areas, they were always dovetailed with infantry. Right. So at the end of the day, I don't think such kind of conflict can be fought alone. It is not a one equipment game, or it's a one arm game. It has to be a combined game. And then, of course, you yourself mentioned that it's a constant three-dimensional warfare. So that makes it even more. It's a slugfest, actually.
It is, and indeed the world seems to be in the grip of conflict. And we have this explainer from Deepak Badana, my colleague, documenting the other conflicts that are raging in the world right now. There's some active engagement theaters, and there are some where simmering, like Nagorno-Karabakh, for instance. Let's take a look.
The world is at war, and it's been so for some time now. Across the globe, disputes and differences over religion, governance, ideology and politics have resulted in war and suffering. Even now, any one of these conflicts has the potential for dramatic escalation and global war. Today, News9 looks at some of the world's most significant ongoing conflicts. The Syrian war, initially an uprising against President Bashar al-Assad, has waned in the recent years, but violence persists in Idlib and has erupted in northeastern Syria between the Kurdish-led STF and the Arab-led DMC. This 12-year conflict, backed by Iran and Russia, has resulted in 500,000 deaths and widespread devastation. At its peak, radical Islamist groups, including ISIS, controlled significant areas, but they have since been defeated through counter-offensives by pro-Syrian forces and a US-led coalition. Today, Syria is a broken nation, with fighting persisting in pockets all over the country. The Sudanese conflict, ongoing for 6 months, has resulted in over 5,000 civilian deaths and 5.7 million people displaced. Khartoum, the capital, is a major battleground between the Sudanese army loyalists and RSF paramilitary forces. Despite being termed as the world's worst, most complex and cruel humanitarian crisis by the UN, global powers have shown limited interest. The crisis includes sexual violence, attacks on hospitals and churches, and extensive looting. Numerous ceasefires have been organized with Saudi and US intervention, but no concrete agreements have been reached, carrying significant security and economic implications for the region due to Sudan's strategic location and resources. The Russo-Ukrainian war has its origins in the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea and support for pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. In February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russia recognized separatist regions and invaded Ukraine. International condemnation and sanctions followed. Russian forces withdrew from Kyiv in April, but retained positions in southern and eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian counter-offensives began in August, with Russia annexing some regions in September. The war persists with a significant humanitarian crisis and massive casualties. Despite the recent peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran ending the 8-year Yemeni conflict, sporadic violence persists. The war, which led to over 377,000 deaths, primarily due to hunger and lack of healthcare, has also resulted in 11,000 children killed or wounded, with 4.5 million people displaced. It began in 2014 when Houthi rebels, supported by Iran, seized control of Yemen's capital and sought a new government, leading to a Saudi-led coalition's airstrikes with US, UK and French support. These strikes caused 19,000 civilian deaths. While hopes for peace emerged after the Saudi-Iran deal, a recent Houthi drone attack has escalated tensions again. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, one of the world's longest running, began after the Soviet Union's collapse, when Nagorno-Karabakh declared its intent to join Armenia, leading to a war in the late 1980s and early 1990s with thousands of casualties. In 2020, Azerbaijan launched a successful military operation, retaking Nagorno-Karabakh and leading to an exodus of ethnic Armenians. The war involved intense fighting, drone warfare, and 3 failed ceasefires. The conflict ended in November 2020 with a ceasefire agreement and Russian peacekeepers were deployed. It remains a contentious issue, with major skirmishes happening in 2023. On 7th October 2023, the Palestinian militant group Hamas launched a massive attack against Israel, killing hundreds of Israelis and taking many civilians hostage. Israel subsequently announced a total siege on the Gaza Strip and launched airstrikes on the territory. As of 16 October, UNRWA, the UN Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees, estimated that over 1 million people, almost half of the total population of Gaza, have been displaced. And this war is just beginning. Where leaders speak of righteous war and justified violence, the truth is that the only law of war is savagery. War is hell, and we are witness to it.
Meanwhile, closer home, there is the Maratha agitation in Maharashtra. Maharashtra is one of India's largest, most prosperous states. It's seen 3 governments in the last 4 years, so there's a bit of political instability there, and now it's seeing a fresh round of agitations. But what is worrying now is the demand for reservations from a section of the state's most powerful community, the Marathas. And joining me to talk about this is my colleague Kiran Tare in Mumbai, who's been tracking these developments. Kiran, tell us what the latest is on the Maratha agitation today. How is it different from what happened a few years back?
The first demand for Maratha reservation, it came up in 1980.
Right.
So the problem is that much old.
Right.
So since 1980, the demand was that Marathas should get a separate reservation.
Right.
The demand was continued till 2020, till last 2-3 years. But now what the demand is, the Marathas, a section of Marathas, they want an OBC status.
Right.
So they want to be called as an OBC rather than an open category. That is what the new agitation is, and the agitation has taken a violent turn. Everybody knows that. But the main point
Violent
is that
turn in what sense, Kiran? I mean, they're burning houses. I mean, how did this happen? I mean, largely this agitation was peaceful the last time around.
Exactly. The last time when there were 58 rallies, massive rallies all over the state between 2016 and 2018, everything was peaceful, very silent protest and very silent agitation. But this time, 2 houses of the MLAs, local MLAs in Bid, have been set up on fire. The MLAs and MPs have been attacked. Their vehicles have been torched. This kind of violence have been never seen in the state before. Maratha agitation was largely known for its peaceful protests. But this time it has taken a violent turn. My information is that there are some political elements who are settling their political scores at the local level.
Right.
In the context of Maratha reservation. So the demand for reservation is a different thing, but they are settling the political score. That is what the information coming from the ground. But coming back to the issue, why Maratha agitation is heating up again? They want OBC status. Now the demand is that the Marathas are nothing but the Kunbis. So Marathas, those who were fighting war against the enemies, they were called Marathas, and those who were involved in the farming, they were Kunbis, but the caste is the same. So now the demand is that everybody wants to be called as a Kunbi. Kunbis are OBCs in Maharashtra. So in that context, Kunbis will get a reservation among the OBCs, the other rest of the subcaste, OBC subcaste. The problem here is the OBCs don't want Marathas to be called as Kundis. They are saying that Marathas are Marathas, they are not Kundis, so they can't be called as OBCs. Here is the clash point. Marathas versus the OBCs. The renewed demand, in fact, today there was a cabinet meeting and Chhagan Bhujbal, who is a very prominent OBC leader, he vehemently opposed calling Marathas as Kundis and giving them an OBC status. So
Right.
this is a new flashpoint coming up in the state now. What has happened that the Maratha community, they are saying that we are 35% in numbers, but in education and government jobs, their representation is not more than 12%. So they wanted more. The demand of more and more, that is what the root cause for this entire demand. In this entire agitation, the biggest sufferer, however, is the Bharatiya Janata Party. Because it was Bharatiya Janata Party's government between 2014 and 2019 which had initiated the Maratha reservation, which was approved by the Bombay High Court, but was struck down by the Supreme Court.
Right.
That kind of anger, that kind of some unrest is there in the community, that it was the BJP who could not complete its homework and the paperwork was incomplete. That's why the Supreme Court has struck down the reservation. Interestingly, today the Maharashtra cabinet has decided to collect the empirical data. The exercise which was done 5 years back, it will be initiated again to make it a foolproof, so that the Maratha reservation could stand in the Supreme Court. This is the new development for the day.
Right, and that's an issue that we're going to be tracking very closely, the Maratha agitation in India's largest, most prosperous state, Maharashtra. As the war in Israel rages, world leaders are keen the conflict shouldn't spread beyond northern Gaza. And that's the reason there are 2 US carrier battle groups in the Mediterranean. My colleague Aditya Raj Kaul put together the story on the diplomatic state of play right now. Let's watch.
Amidst the ongoing major conflicts in the world, from Russia-Ukraine war to the latest Israel-Hamas conflict, world leaders are seen trying to mediate between countries in an attempt to be the peaceniks, like China's Xi Jinping, calling President Zelensky, assuring that it won't be adding fuel to the fire in Ukraine, or for that matter, India's strategic neutrality on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or like the Russian President Putin describing India and China as close allies and partners during the India-China border clash.
Look, always great powers think in terms of resolving problems, or to be seen to be resolving problems. So generally the outlook of external players who come from outside the region is to be seen to be above the fray and to be managing the competition and the rivalries and maintaining some kind of order or stability.
Joe, I want to give you a clear picture of the difficult situation we face. We were struck Saturday by an attack whose savagery I can say we have not seen since the Holocaust. I mean, we had hundreds massacred, families wiped out in their beds in their homes, women brutally raped and murdered, over 100 kidnapped, including children.
Look, it's natural for world leaders to try to be peaceniks, as you call them. A personal angle of wanting to be called a peacemaker for the sake of posterity or history, that angle may be there. And then it is natural for these leaders to try and resolve the issues rather than protract the issues, because there is not going to be an easy solution to the whole problem, just like we are seeing in Russia-Ukraine.
Now, with a fresh war brewing in West Asia, several world leaders have advised nations to maintain peace and restrain. President Biden recently suggested for a 2-state solution to the Israel-Hamas conflict.
US President Joe Biden has called for restraint, or has called for postponing the ground offensive. There are so many American citizens, more than 100, I'm told, dual citizens, people involved in the hostages. So there are many wheels within wheels which force world leaders to act the way they do.
Definitely the Americans for a long time, long time have been in this game of wanting to be seen as brokers of peace. They attempted that most prominently in the 1990s after the Cold War ended. Bill Clinton brought the Palestinians and the Israelis together and created the Oslo Accords, which paved the way for a so-called two-state solution, but it didn't work out. The mediator part, they have actually lost it. I mean, there was a time, the 1990s, when they mediated and were somewhat successful during the Clinton administration. Subsequently, there have been some peace plans and so on, but the most recent one under the presidency of Donald Trump did not go anywhere. It was outrightly rejected by the Palestinians and by the Arabs. So it is not really an honest broker because of its partiality towards Israel. So it doesn't necessarily see the two sides in equivalence. For them, Israel always matters more than the Palestinians. And I think Biden administration, because there's a left wing within the Democratic Party in the US that is more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and more critical of Israel's use of overwhelming force and all that, they may want to try and show that honest broker or balance, especially as the war drags on and the casualties keep on mounting. The humanitarian disaster keeps getting worse and worse. The US will be compelled to step in and try to slow down Israel's campaign or even halt it, because there's probably a limit beyond which they don't want the destruction to carry on. Peace broker and wanting to arbitrate between the warring parties is more like an aspiration today. Unfortunately, there's no big global player, at least not a single country, that can play that role anymore.
Same is being seen with President Putin, who himself has been leading an all-out war in Ukraine since the last year. He has cautioned the world leaders to stop Israel's military campaign in Gaza due to the risk of wider conflagration and its potential to spill over far beyond the borders of West Asia.
So other players, the Russians, they are closer to the Iranians who are allied with Hamas and less so with Israel. But Russia also has some channels of communication and some kind of a give and take, pragmatic relationship with Israel. So they also probably do not want this to go out of hand, where it is all-out war, which leads to mutual destruction of all sides. The Chinese, I don't think, they have played a role in the reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but less so when it comes to Israel, because Israel is a staunch US ally. So China doesn't have much leverage with Israel, although China has positive economic relations with Israel. So I don't think they have that leverage to be able to play a role here.
At the moment, there are at least a dozen active conflicts between various nations. But at the same time, the world has seen unprecedented cooperation between several past adversaries. However, the irony is that most of these leaders have been leading an aggressive war in and around their respective continents, barring India's Prime Minister Modi. Is it then that they really care about world peace, or is it merely a projection? Well, it is true that any conflict in any corner of the world is capable of disturbing peace and economic prosperity in another corner. As such is the nature of the wars which we have seen in the past.
The larger question, or the bigger factor, is the fact that today, what happened with Russia-Ukraine war? 20 months and counting, it has affected economy all over the world. The moment some flare-up takes place, even war of words start between America and China, the Sensex starts going down. Today, the oil prices have shot up the moment this Middle East crisis has conflict has started. So, when all this is going to happen, it is going to affect the whole world.
So will we see then these leaders coming up with concrete solutions for the ongoing conflicts and themselves not engaging in any further conflict leading to another world war?
I mean, in my view, all the peace processes, Abraham Accord, or this Israel-Saudi warming up that was happening just before this Hamas attack, Israel-Hamas conflict, everything has been set back.
My colleague Aditya Raj Kaul just put together a story on the diplomatic state of play in West Asia right now. Aditya, tell us what the state of play is right now. There are a lot of foreign powers keen to ensure this conflict doesn't spill beyond Israel's borders.
Well, at this moment, Sandeep, the world is divided like never before, at least in the last many decades. We've seen the division clearly at the United Nations as well. But there's a competitive zeal among some of the world leaders to be peaceniks in this entire process. And some of them, including Biden, Putin, Xi Jinping, and to an extent the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi as well, who've been speaking to both the sides, one, the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli diplomats, and on the other side, the Arab world, and in particular, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. And at least messaging, at least a narrative that these countries want to convey is that they stand with peace, even though they back one side or the other. The Russian president yesterday came out with a statement saying that he fully backs a full-fledged Palestinian state. Biden, on the other hand, wants to delay the war as much as possible. But as of now, the invasion continues, and it seems to be a long invasion, even though there are positive reports for Israel that some of the hostages have been released, at least 4 to 5 in number till now. Yesterday, there was an IDF soldier, Ori Magadish, who was also released, and that was after an operation and not a deal. So as of now, there are more than 240 hostages who are still in Gaza with Hamas, and that seems to be a big sticking point for this entire operation and the diplomatic negotiations.
Right. In fact, I was listening into this lecture by Professor Mearsheimer this morning, where he mentioned that the war in West Asia could delay the US pivot to Asia, which has been happening forever. Colonel Awasthi, do you think that China could take advantage of what's going on right now and make a grab for Taiwan? The US is already involved in 2 conflicts.
Sandeep, what you say is essentially correct. You know that the famous American pivot to Asia may be a little delayed now because of the 2 conflicts now, one in the West Asia and now the other one, which is already raging since February 2022 in Ukraine. However, I would reserve my opinion about the conflict insofar as the Chinese are concerned for the Taiwanese mainland because of 2 reasons. Firstly, we have to understand that Taiwan is a very, very important entity for the military-industrial complex in the United States of America. To just put you into perspective, a single Javelin weapon system consists of as much as 200 chips. So that's the amount of the semiconductors or chips that we are talking about into a single weapon system, a Javelin weapon system. That's one. The second thing is you have to look at the very clear economic reasons. You have to understand that China is a very big trading partner also of Taiwan, so to say. And the third thing is there is reciprocal investment from the Taiwanese mainland into China and the Chinese investment into Taiwanese mainland. So at this juncture and with the present, set of problems that the Chinese themselves have, it may be a little far-fetched that, somebody takes advantage of such a thing. Yes, you are absolutely right as I look at it that yes, the pivot of the US has now essentially shifted from Asia, obviously because of these 2 raging conflicts.
They can't handle more than 2 conflicts at the same time.
Nobody can, actually. They themselves are very gruesome. Both of them are very gruesome. We are all aware of that.
Massive loss of life.
Massive loss
Aditya,
of
I
life.
want to talk to you about this because last week I remember asking you about how Israel was hell-bent on going in for the operation. You said, despite all that was going on around us, the talks of peace, Israel was going to go in. And the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said there's no ceasefire, they're just going in. Look into your crystal ball again and tell us whether China would actually make a play for Taiwan while the world is looking at West Asia and Eastern Europe.
Well, this seems to be the right time for it, but I doubt. I feel that the incursions from the Chinese will continue, the provocations will continue, just like they've been doing for years together, entering the air defense area of the Taiwanese. That will obviously continue and maybe that will increase. In the South China Sea also we'll see an increased activity, but I don't see either in Taiwan or on the the western side of the eastern side of our border, in Galwan as well and the Chushul Moldi area. I don't see any much activity in the last many months also. I think there's been relative peace negotiations also underway at the diplomatic level and the military level. But of course, the Chinese being Chinese will be, of course, hell-bent on provocations, incursions, both in India and in Taiwan. But at the same time, I see this Israel-Hamas conflict increasing by the day, just like the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister of Israel have mentioned that the second stage of this, the second phase of this war will be for several months. So this is to eradicate the pockets of resistance in Gaza. And as you know, that there are many tunnels within Gaza, and it's difficult to eliminate these people inside the tunnels. Even though yesterday there was a very successful operation in which a tunnel was attacked through a rocket and a missile, and there were eliminations of the terrorists of Hamas
hiding inside those tunnels.
That's right.
Is that the first time that a tunnel has been directly attacked during this phase of the operation?
During this phase of the war, yes, but I think it has happened in the past as well, and it is difficult. You know, it's not like a tunnel, because we've seen tunnels, Sandeep, on this side in Jammu and Kashmir as well, where a lot of tunnels are used, and these are small tunnels.
They're crawl tunnels.
They're crawl tunnels,
like the Vietnamese tunnels.
For ammunition, for people to cross over. In fact, after the Jaish-e-Mohammed attacks in 2019, some of the Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists actually crossed over not from Pakistan to India, but to escape from India to Pakistan through those tunnels. But these tunnels that I have visited, you know, at the Israel-Gaza border are well made. I mean, people can actually walk around it very happily, peacefully. They don't have to fear for their lives. There's a good lighting system. It's a concrete tunnel, and you can actually adjust a lot of equipment, a lot of humanitarian assistance inside these tunnels to actually withhold, you know, for many, many weeks.
In fact, you've done a beautiful explainer there. Let's just bring that explainer in of your experience of the Hamas Metro, as it's called.
Gaza over the last 2 weeks has become the flashpoint of a deadly war between Israel and Hamas terror group after terror attacks in southern Israel on 7th of October. Over 3,000 people have been killed in Gaza in Israeli airstrikes, while over 1,300 have been killed in Israel due to the terror attacks. Hamas in Gaza over the years has built a massive network of underground tunnels, often used to carry out attacks in Israel and smuggle goods from Egypt. Yet, mostly it is used to let Hamas carry out its operations through underground command centers, which are also equipped to store and transport men and ammunition. Here, right behind me, you can get a glimpse of the map of these underground tunnels all across. In fact, in November 2022, I was a part of a delegation where the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli government had invited me to visit all the border areas. In fact, this was one of the areas near Sderot, around the southern Israel, where I had visited and in fact gone inside a tunnel that Hamas had really constructed, along with concrete, electricity, to in fact store ammunition and also send in terrorists into Israel for terror attacks. In 2021, Hamas had claimed to have built a tunnel network of over 500 kilometers, which is more than the size of the Delhi metro network. This massive network of tunnels used by the Hamas terrorists is known as the Gaza Metro. These tunnels are mostly built manually using basic tools, and yet there is electricity within these tunnels, and the structure is solidified using concrete, as I said before. Tunnels have been an integral part of the warfare in the past as well. In the mountains of Afghanistan, both the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban have often used shelter within the tunnels. During the Vietnam War as well, the Viet Cong tunnels were used by the Vietnamese in the jungles of Southeast Asia. It was impossible for the US Army to enter these tunnels due to the sheer size of it. Hamas once again has been using these tunnels since the war with Israel has begun. You can see this is the tunnel which is being used continuously by the Hamas terrorists. It's a very narrow passageway which is very dark, but there is electricity at some ends. And on the other hand, you can see these rockets as well that have been kept to attack the Israeli Defense Forces. And IDF has also accused the Hamas of hiding inside these tunnels and often using civilians in Gaza as human shields. These tunnels are often difficult to navigate because of its maze-like structure and booby traps by the Hamas all along the passageway. Israel, however, is all set to now launch a massive ground assault inside Gaza to crush Hamas. Almost 4 lakh troops and reservists on ground have been mobilized for the same.
The Israeli Defense Forces would also be using bunker busters or laser-guided bombs, also known as GBU-28, to demolish the underground tunnels or any targets hidden far below the surface. The bunker buster is a 19 feet long explosive developed by the United States, which goes underneath the ground before exploding. It would, however, be a challenging ground assault because Hamas is currently holding nearly 200 Israeli and foreign hostages who could have been kept in these tunnels as well.
So that was the Hamas metro. Colonel Awasthi, back to China and your favorite topic of semiconductors. Do you think China doesn't have the stomach for a conflict right now? The world would be very relieved to hear that, but what's your take on it? They're not going to move in now.
You know, I would go back into the ancient, battle texts, and I would like to possibly look at Baron von Clausewitz, who said that war depends on the trinity of factors. It's the political will, is the public opinion, and the competence of the military. To my mind, I don't think the Troika is complete.
What's the missing link in these three?
A lot of people may have a lot of different perceptions of that, but I feel the link is not complete insofar as the Trinity is concerned.
Right.
Now, when you're looking at, what, as Aditya is saying, that, there would be incursions and things like that, I totally go with him. There could be. But, here you're not looking at this ultra-hybrid model that you're seeing in Gaza.
Right.
Here it would be conventional, so to say.
Right.
Essentially because it is not landlocked. It's an island territory, so there's a buffer.
You have to cross the seas, you have to physically assault with amphibious landings.
There would be amphibious landings.
Right.
All three dimensions would be used. A large amount of, economic as well as military might would be, utilized to do such a thing. At this juncture, I have my doubts that China would possibly venture into such kind of a, I won't call it an adventure or misadventure.
Right.
I think it's a little difficult for me to understand that such a thing would happen at this juncture.
But Aditya, China benefits from what's going on right now in the world with the Russia-Ukraine war and the war in West Asia, right? I mean, it's taken the American attention, it's drained the American ammunition and ordnance and the military-industrial complex. They are the long-term gainers from this conflict, don't you think so?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the right time for the Chinese to do whatever they want, at least through their diplomatic efforts, and that's what they're trying. They invited the Russian president for the conference, and of course, Xi Jinping himself has been actually directly negotiating with several of these leaders. Actually, in our story, on the peaceniks, we have actually spoken in detail about how Biden, Putin, and Xi Jinping are trying to develop themselves and put this messaging out that they are the global peaceniks who are actually going to resolve the Israel-Hamas conflict. So it's a win-win situation for the Chinese as of now. How much they can actually benefit from it, how much they will actually use it to their advantage remains to be seen. But of course, Americans are completely drained. As I said, they want to delay this war as much as possible. And this is something that the Chinese want, to keep the Americans engaged as much as possible through the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Colonel Awasthi, now, how does India benefit from this current chaos that the world is in? I mean, not to suggest that we would take advantage of a conflict, but the way that geopolitics has unfolded in the last couple of months has put India in a fairly advantageous position, especially when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing. You've been talking and writing a lot about these developments. Tell us how we benefit from friendshoring, the new concept that's come out in the United States when they want to diversify chip manufacturing.
See, what I personally believe is that all these conflicts make us understand what exactly is the importance of the chip today. Right. A chip as rudimentary as a servo or a capacitor or a microcontroller or a MEMS or a memory or whatever it may be, they still form an integral part, a very integral part of all of the most advanced weapon systems in the world. So it is very important that today your defense industry and the semiconductor industry has to converge. Because till you converge with the kind of money that we spend in, getting a lot of weapons and various other warlike equipment from abroad, that needs to be catering to only our needs in a very indigenized version, and that can only happen only if the chip industry is absolutely on track. Now, when you look at the Indian semiconductor policy which came out in the December of 2021, it gives a very, very big fillip and impetus to this aspect. Right. So when this happens, I think another 4 or 5 years with the friend shoring which you just mentioned, the technology transfers that you mentioned, and various other, issues which have been addressed by the government in policy, in industry and in academia, I think we should be able to do that.
This convergence of defense industry and semiconductors, where does that follow indigenous semiconductor industry being set up? Or
it should.
It should
actually,
simultaneously.
It should. Logically, that's the way it should pan out. Because at the end of the day, you see, when you look at the defense establishment also, and you've seen a large amount of, indigenization lists which have come out.
Right.
You've indigenized a large part of your weapon system, apparatus.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, when you're looking into high-tech or critical technologies, you will have to converge these two vectors. Till you converge these two vectors, I don't think you'll be able to get into that kind of manufacturing capabilities indigenously. And then either way, when you know that a chip is the heart of any weapon system, whether it is a navigation or it is an optoelectronics or it is kinetic, non-kinetic, we are not even debating that. But at the end of the day, if it is not yours, then there is an issue. So essentially, what I intend telling you is that the defense industry and the semiconductor industry have to, and they will converge in times to come.
Meanwhile, speaking of technology, numerous Indian opposition politicians have claimed to have received threat alerts from Apple stating that state-sponsored attackers were targeting their phones. My colleague Ghulam Jilani spoke to cybersecurity expert Jiten Jain about this phenomenon.
One has to understand that this threat intelligence is based on certain indicators of compromise, which are always not absolute, which are always not correct. So there is always a scope of doubt, there is always a chance of error when it comes to interpreting these evidences. And that is why Apple has also said that they may also be false alarms. We believe that you may have been a target of an attack, but it may as well as be a false alarm. So we have to keep both those things in mind. And also when they talk about the state-sponsored attack, they means these well-funded groups, which are organized groups, which are supported by certain entities. And the state means it could be any state. It could be an individual state or a country or a different country or a state within a different country, or maybe a small province within China. It could be anyone. So, these are the three important things we have to understand. Now, in this context, Apple has sent an email to certain opposition leaders and some, leaders who are working in think tanks, informing them that they may have been a target of a state-sponsored attack. Whether they were compromised or not, we don't know. From where these attacks were originated, Apple has not revealed. The time scale when the attacks were carried out, which time duration, when, they have not revealed. So I think it is better for Apple to give more information, detailed information, for victims as well as for the law enforcement authorities to analyze and investigate these attacks.
Aditya, 4 years back we saw the same Pegasus NSO controversy breaking out where a lot of people claimed their phones had been hacked and tapped. Do you see a return of this phenomenon? Is it a false alarm? What's the company saying?
Well, firstly, we are living in an age where there is information warfare and there is hacking, not ethical hacking, actually happening on large scale. In the wars that have happened in Russia, Ukraine and Israel, Hamas, a lot of propaganda, narrative setting has happened, but at the same time, there have been attempts to hack to a large extent. We received a statement from Apple as well. If I can just go through this statement, it says, Apple does not attribute the threat notifications to any specific state-sponsored attacker. It goes on to state state-sponsored attackers are very well funded and sophisticated, and their attacks evolve over time. Detecting such attacks relies on threat intelligence signals that are often imperfect and incomplete. It's possible that some Apple threat notifications may be false alarms or that some attacks are not detected. We are unable to provide information about what causes us these threat notifications, as that may help the state-sponsored attackers adapt their behavior to evade detection in the future. But Sandeep, what has also happened now very interestingly, and that generally happens in India, is a political slugfest, because a lot of opposition leaders have received these notifications as well, and they have said that it is the government of India which is snooping on them, and there are attempts being made
But there's
to
no
actually-
evidence to suggest it's a government entity.
There's
just
absolutely no
suspicion.
evidence. In fact, Apple says that they have sent these notifications to individuals in 150 countries.
Right.
And it's not just the opposition leaders, there are people from the government,
Right.
in fact, several think tanks as well,
Yep.
who have received this statement and alert from Apple, clearly indicating that it's a generic in nature.
Right.
There's no specific group that they're targeting, and it could be some kind of a technical failure also, which resulted in it. So overall, I think it will brew into a political controversy. Even the opposition leaders are not able to believe the Apple statement saying that this is a fake statement that's coming in. So it's a controversy we'll have to watch out for. But Apple clearly saying that it's a very generic kind of an alert.
It's a very generic alert, and that's all we have time for, gentlemen, this evening. Thank you very much, Col Awasthi, Aditya, for joining me, and we'll continue to track news and developments on the News9 Plus show. Thank you for watching.